The blizzard rolled in from the northwest the way Saskatchewan storms always did, without apology and without warning. By 4 in the afternoon, the sky above Dunmore Creek had turned the color of old pewter, and by 5 there was nothing left to see but white. Stanton Royce had been driving his team back from Moose Jaw when the storm swallowed the road. He knew the route well enough to navigate by feel. The slight rise before the Hendrickson cutoff, the hollow that collected meltwater every spring, the lean of the wind against the right side of the sleigh that meant he was still pointing south. 7 miles from his farm was not so far that a man needed to panic. He had crossed worse. He kept his hands steady on the reins and let the horses red the ground beneath their hooves. He almost drove past her. The sleigh was on its side in the ditch, one runner pointing at the sky, a gray mare standing stock-still in her traces and shaking from cold. The load, bolts of fabric from the look of it, was scattered across the snow in muddy rolls, and there, half-sheltered against the overturned frame, was a woman. She had one arm raised against the wind, and her coat was wrong for the weather, too thin by half, a city coat on prairie weather. Stanton pulled his team to a stop. She looked up when she heard him. Her face was chalked with cold, her lips gone pale, but her eyes were steady. Not frightened. Something more like exhausted resignation. "I hit a patch of ice," she said. Her voice was level, as though she were reporting this to no one in particular. "Can you stand?" "I've been trying." She got to her feet on the second attempt, favoring her right side. Her hands were bare. He didn't ask why. Bare hands in a blizzard were usually an accident of panic, not negligence. He helped her to his sleigh, got her up onto the bench, wrapped her in the horse blanket he kept folded beneath the seat. She didn't argue. She didn't thank him either, which he respected more than thanks would have earned. Her mare couldn't be left in the cold. He tied the gray to the back of his rig, and they moved slowly into the white. She told him her name when they were halfway to his farm. Petra Gould. She said it the way people say their names in towns where they are not entirely welcome. Flat, prepared for whatever reaction followed. He told her his. She nodded once and turned her face back toward the storm. The farmhouse was cold when they arrived, but cold in the honest prairie way, the kind of fire could fix. Stanton had the stove going in 12 minutes. He'd done it enough years alone that he no longer had to think about it. He set a pot of water on, found the extra wool blanket from the chest at the foot of his bed, and brought it out without commentary. Petra Gould sat at the kitchen table and unwrapped her hands one finger at a time. Her knuckles were raw and white. She flexed them carefully, testing each one. "No frostbite," she said, more to herself than to him. "Your right side, how bad?" She pressed 2 fingers against her ribs, just under her arm, and winced. "I landed on the runner when it went over. Bruised, nothing broken." He took her at her word. She had the hands of someone who knew bodies, careful, precise, clinical in their assessment of her own pain. The storm settled in for 3 days. Not the soft kind of storm that blows through overnight and leaves everything glittering and manageable. A proper Saskatchewan blow, the kind that buried fence lines and turned the familiar geometry of fields into nothing at all. The road to Dunmore Creek disappeared under 2 feet of drift by the first morning. The horizon dissolved. The world contracted to this kitchen, these walls, the sound of wind under the eaves. Petra Gould kept to herself in the way of someone accustomed to small spaces and difficult situations. She helped without being asked, washing the breakfast things, mending a tear in the curtain above the kitchen window she'd noticed on her first morning, feeding his 2 dogs without being told where the grain bin was. She asked before she touched anything that wasn't hers. On the second day, Stanton found her at the window watching the chickadees on the bare elder branch outside. There were 4 of them, impossibly small and impossibly cheerful in the middle of a whiteout, picking at the bark for whatever seeds had survived the freeze. "They stay through the whole winter," he said. I know. She didn't look away from them. They're the only thing up here that doesn't seem to mind. That night, after she had gone to sleep in his daughter's old room. His daughter, who'd been gone to Saskatchewan for 2 years now, and taken the bedroom's particular quietness with her. Stanton sat at the kitchen table with a piece of birch he'd had on the shelf for no particular reason. He picked up his carving knife. His hands knew what to do before his mind did. On the third day, the wind dropped. Not gone, but reduced to sound rather than force. Stanton went out to see to the horses and clear a path to the barn. When he came back in, Petra was standing at the stove with her arms crossed, not cooking, just standing, thinking. You're from Dunmore Creek, she said. 7 miles south. Then you know who I am. It wasn't a question. He poured himself a cup of coffee. I know your name. She turned from the stove. And what they say about me. He met her eyes. They were darker than he'd expected. A particular shade of hazel that shifted in the light, and right now they were waiting for him to flinch or look away. He didn't. I've heard something, he said. I don't put much stock in what Claudette Norris says about anyone. Something shifted in Petra's face, barely, quickly, then it was composed again. She sat down at the table and told him the truth. Not because she owed it to him. He hadn't asked for it, but because she'd been carrying it for 8 months and needed somewhere to set it down. She'd seen Harold Norris taking morphine files from the infirmary cabinet. She'd told Dr. Granger. Granger had told Harold, and 2 days later, the inventory had come up short, and her name was the one written in the margin beside the shortage. She said it plainly, without performance. The way a person tells a story they've already processed past the point of anger, and arrived at something harder and quieter, a kind of cold clarity. He had more to protect than I did, she said. He was right about that, at least. Stanton was quiet for a moment. Outside, a chickadee called from the elder branch, a small, absurd sound in all that cold silence. Why didn't you leave? He asked. I was going to. She touched the pocket of her dress, an unconscious gesture, the kind made when a person is thinking of something they're carrying. I have a sister in Moose Jaw. I haven't seen her in 11 years. I was on my way to her when the storm came. He didn't ask about the 11 years. Some gaps had to be invited into, and no invitation had been offered. That evening, after supper, he went to the shelf and brought the carving to the table. He set it in front of her. The chickadee was small, 2 inches perhaps, shaped from birch and smoothed to a finish with the flat of his thumb. He'd painted nothing on it. The grain of the wood was its own coloring, pale where the knife had gone deep, honey-toned at the edges. Petra looked at it for a long time without reaching for it. You made this last night, she said. Seemed like something to do. She picked it up, turned it slowly in her fingers. Looked at it the way people look at small things that have been made with actual care. Not with reverence, but with recognition. No one's made me anything in a long time, she said. These hands do the work of 3 people, he said. Seems like they deserved something that wasn't work. She set the chickadee on the table between them and didn't speak for a while. When she did, her voice was careful and quiet. Thank you, Stanton. He'd heard his name said. In 100 different ways in 44 years. Formally at the grain exchange. By his mother when she was losing patience. By Selma, before the fever took her. He didn't know exactly why it sounded different in Petra Gould's voice. He only knew that it did. The road cleared enough by the 4th morning to drive. He took her back to Dunmore Creek, her gray mare tethered behind, the salvageable bolts of fabric wrapped in oilcloth and stacked in the bed of the sleigh. She thanked him at the edge of town, briefly, sincerely, and walked the last quarter-mile alone. The way she walked everywhere, he was beginning to understand. Chin level, pace unhurried, prepared for whatever was waiting at the other end. What was waiting, most often, was Claudette Norris. Stanton heard it 3 days later, when he came into the Mercantile for supplies. The bell above the door was still ringing when Claudette's voice reached him. 4 days, alone with a man 7 miles from town, and she expects the community to simply overlook. The store went quiet when he stepped in. He set his list on the counter. Around him, 2 farmers and a woman he didn't know well were watching. Claudette Norris looked at him with that particular expression she kept for men who inconvenienced her plans. Stanton, warm in the way of things that aren't. Claudette. He picked up a tin of coffee from the shelf himself, since she wasn't moving toward it. I'll take this, and whatever's on the list. We were just talking about your house guest. He looked at her steadily. Were you? People worry about propriety, about what it looks like when a young woman spends that many nights in a man's home without. She was stranded in a blizzard, he said. I had a house and a stove. Anyone decent would have done the same. He set the coffee on the counter. The trouble is, not everyone in this town qualifies. Claudette's expression shifted. Her voice dropped to something sharper. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. He paid for his goods. Petra Gould is owed an honest accounting from this community. She won't get one. That's between your conscience and hers. He picked up his bag. I'd be grateful if you kept my name out of whatever you're telling people. He walked out. Behind him, no one said anything at all. Petra came to his farm the following week. She'd walked the 7 miles. He found her at the gate with her coat buttoned to the throat and the chickadee in her hand, held out like something being returned, before it could cost more than she could afford. I can't keep this, she said. Why not? She looked at him steadily, and he could see the effort in it. Not weakness, but the effort of someone who had decided to be honest, even when honesty was harder than silence. Because it means something, and I won't let you attach yourself to my situation. They're already talking about you. It'll get worse before it gets better, if it gets better at all. You have a business here, a reputation, a life that doesn't need my trouble folded into it. He took the chickadee from her hand, held it, then held it back. Keep it. Stanton! I knew what I was doing when I went into that store. I knew what they'd say before I opened my mouth. He watched her face. I don't make careless mistakes about things like that. You might be making one right now. I'm 44 years old, he said, with neither pride nor apology. I've made enough real mistakes to know what they feel like. He paused. This isn't one. She looked away. Past him, toward the field. Brown stubble under a November sky. The elder branch bare, the chickadees long since moved on to wherever chickadees went in harder weather. My wife died 6 years ago, he said. Typhoid. Granger came too late. He said it the way he said most things, plainly, like a man reading from a ledger, just the entries, no embellishment. I'm not saying that to trade grief with you. I'm saying it because you should know I understand what it is to carry the town's polite pity around like something you never asked to hold. I understand what it does to a person over time. Her throat moved. I'm 33, she said. I have a theft accusation attached to my name. I have 11 years of silence with my sister that I haven't fully explained. I am not. She stopped. Started again. I'm not easy. I didn't ask for easy. She laughed. A short, involuntary sound, the kind that escapes before a person can decide whether to let it. She pressed her hand briefly to her mouth, then lowered it. You should find someone without all of this, she said. Quieter, almost a plea. He looked at her. The road behind her, the empty field, the enormous November sky pressing down on all of it. He had spent 6 years in this house becoming fluent in solitude, learning how to call sufficiency what was really just endurance. He had gotten very good at it. He found he no longer wanted to be. Petra. His voice was steady. I already know who I want. She's standing right in front of me. She didn't move. The wind moved across the stubble between them. After a while, She took the chickadee back and put it in her pocket. The community supper at Zion United was held the following Saturday. Stanton had not attended in 4 years. He attended this one. He arrived to find Petra already there, standing apart from the main gathering near the far window, a plate of food balanced in her hands that she hadn't touched. She saw him come in. Something in her expression shifted. Relief, or the deliberate attempt to not show relief. He crossed the room and stood near her without ceremony. Claudette Norris noticed within 2 minutes. She crossed the hall with a plate of date squares and a smile assembled for an audience. She stopped close enough to Petra that it read as a choice. "It's so lovely that Stanton's been charitable," she said, to the room as much as to either of them. "Given the circumstances." She looked at Petra. "Some people do take advantage of a good man's generosity. It's a known pattern, nothing personal." Stanton drew breath. But he didn't need to use it. From the far side of the hall, Mrs. Edith Swan set down her teacup on the long table and began walking toward them. Edith Swan was 72 years old, the widow of Dunmore Creek's first schoolteacher, and she had been in this community long enough to have taught most of the people in this room their letters, their manners, and the particular difference between righteousness and cruelty. When she walked, conversations diminished around her. The way sound diminishes before weather. Claudette. Her voice was not raised. It didn't need to be. "I've been watching you do this for 40 years. I watched you do it to Marion Holt when her husband left. I watched you do it to the Bertrand girl who had the nerve to find work at the mill when the family needed it." She paused. "I'd like it to stop now." Claudette's chin lifted. "I'm only saying what the community is thinking. You're saying what you need to say to protect a household from a question that was never properly answered." Edith looked around the room, not with accusation, but with the steady patience of a woman who has made up her mind and is simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. Harold Norris was not careful with what belonged to this community's infirmary. "I know that because Dr. Granger told me himself 3 months ago at the Findlay supper when he'd had too much brandy and too much guilt in the same evening." She let that sit for a moment. "I kept my counsel because I thought the matter had been settled quietly. I see it was settled on the wrong person's back." The hall held its breath. Claudette said, "You can't simply." "I'm not speaking to be argued with," Edith said. "I'm speaking because this young woman has been carrying a false reputation for 8 months, and I am tired of watching a town full of people who know better allow it to continue." She turned to Petra then, and her voice changed. Not softer exactly, but more direct. "You are owed an honest accounting from this community. I am sorry it took this long for someone to say so plainly." Petra didn't cry. Her chin lifted and her shoulders dropped, the visible release of something that had been held rigid for a very long time. She nodded once, deliberately. Stanton stepped forward and stood beside her. Not protectively, not in front of her, beside her, as an equal and a declaration. He did not make a speech. He was not a man built for speeches. He simply stood there in the Zion United Hall, in plain sight of everyone who had watched this town decide what Petra Gould was worth, and made no attempt whatsoever to step away. One of the farmers he'd known for 20 years came across the room and shook Petra's hand. A young mother, whose daughter had been turned the right way in the womb by Petra's hands 8 months ago, on a night when Granger hadn't answered his door, came forward and touched Petra's arm and said something quiet that no one else could hear. Small gestures, the kind that make no noise and mean everything. Claudette Norris left the supper early, and nobody mentioned it for the rest of the evening. In December, 2 letters arrived at Petra's rented room above the tack shop on 2nd Street. One was from her sister in Moose Jaw, brief, careful, written in handwriting that had clearly changed in 11 years, but was recognizable underneath the changes. It said, "I heard from an old neighbor that you'd left and tried to write. I'm sorry it took me this long. Come for Christmas if you want to. You can bring someone if you'd like. The second was from the infirmary board in Saskatchewan. Formal language, typed on official letterhead. Dr. Granger had filed a long-delayed report. The inventory discrepancy had been reviewed. The record of Petra Gould's employment was hereby corrected. No further action required. She read both letters at Stanton's kitchen table, which she had taken to visiting on Sunday afternoons, ostensibly to use his sewing frame for a commission she'd taken on, practically because the farmhouse had stopped feeling empty in a way that neither of them felt the need to explain aloud. When she looked up from the sister's letter, there was that brightness in her eyes again. Not cold. Not the brightness of someone holding grief at a distance. She wants me to come for Christmas, Petra said. Then you should go. She looked at him with the directness she always used when she meant something. She said I could bring someone. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the December chickadees had returned to the elder branch. 3 of them, pecking methodically at bark, small and undeterred and entirely committed to surviving what the winter had to offer. I could drive you, he said. Moose Jaw's a long way in the cold. Stanton. I know. I want to say it out loud. She set the sister's letter down on the table beside the official one. She looked at him the way she had looked at him in the blizzard, when she'd been too cold and too tired for anything but the unadorned truth. Level. Steady. Not performing anything. I love you. I wanted you to know that before I went anywhere, so there was no confusion about where I was coming back to. He'd spent 6 years learning the particular weight of a house that holds the shape of someone who is no longer in it. He'd learned to eat alone and sleep without the specific gravity of another person in the next room and call that sufficiency. He'd become genuinely skilled at it. He was done being skilled at it. I love you too, he said. I've known it for a while. How long? He thought about it honestly, the way he thought about everything. When you took the chickadee back. She laughed, the same short, unguarded sound that caught her off guard sometimes. She pressed her hand to her mouth, then didn't. This time she let it stay on her face. That's a very small moment to fall in love in, she said. Small moments are all we get most of the time. He looked at her across the table, at the carved chickadee she always set out between them when she sat down, at the afternoon light crossing the kitchen floor in the long, thin angle of December. The rest is just deciding what to do about it. What do we do about it? He was quiet for a moment that wasn't awkward, because nothing between them was awkward anymore. Then, I think we drive to Moose Jaw and meet your sister. And then we come home and figure out the next part. She smiled at that. Not the careful, contained version she wore in Dunmore Creek when people were watching. The real one. All right, she said. They left for Moose Jaw the week before Christmas, the sleigh loaded with provisions and a wrapped parcel for a sister Petra hadn't stood in the same room with in 11 years. The road was hard and clear, and the prairie sky above the flats was so blue. In the winter cold, it looked like something constructed on purpose. The chickadee was in Petra's coat pocket. She'd put it there without comment before they left, the way a person pockets something they've decided belongs on them. Dunmore Creek watched them go. Some of them whispered, some of them waved. 1 or 2 did both, which was probably the most honest response. When they came over the long ridge south of town and the fields opened wide on either side, that specific, enormous, wind-scrubbed prairie beauty that asked nothing of you and gave you the whole visible sky. Petra exhaled, a long breath, the kind that has been held for more than just a moment. I forgot what it looked like when you can actually see it, she said. Takes time to see the landscape. To stop looking at the ground, he said. Takes time to remember you're allowed to look up. She was quiet. The horses moved steadily forward. The road ran straight ahead to a horizon that promised nothing in particular and delivered everything that mattered. Then she reached across and took his hand. Not dramatically. The way a person takes hold of something they have made up their mind to keep. He held it the rest of the way. The world was wide and cold and full of hard winter light, and neither of them looked back at the town behind them or worried, for the first time in a very long time, about who might be watching.